Welcome, everybody. It is Business Monday here at GoLocal Live. Monday afternoon, I am here with Cha-ching, Gary Sass, the money man. He was out in some secret mission for somebody last week. He is back this week. We are talking every possible fiscal policy known to mankind, federal, state, local, intergalactic. We've got it all going on. Let's bring it here to Rhode Island. We've chatted a little bit over the last couple of weeks, but there's certainly some indicators. Job losses for the last 4 months, not major. Len Ladaro is showing some numbers cooling. Some other people are. What's your take on the state of the Rhode Island economy?
I think a black cloud is descending over the economy of the state.
We don't like black clouds.
Oh, I think a gray cloud is descending over the state. No, there was some work done by the Regional Economic Studies Group at Bryant, which is Professor Eddie Tibaldi, who we work very closely with. And just to take a second to summarize and highlight some data. So first, if you look at gross domestic product, for the fourth quarter, Oz is going to grow by 0.2%.
Rhode Island's is going to grow by 0.2%.
The United States, 2.6%.
Yeah, so slightly off the.
Slightly off the map.
We're dead flat, and they're almost at, and the rest of the country is almost at 3%.
And well, Massachusetts is a little under 1%, but we're about 1/5 of Massachusetts. So our gross domestic product is not growing. The indicators are that the growth will also be slow in the first quarter of 19. If you look at jobs, you mentioned what Professor Ladaro spoke about, and the numbers are really startling. If you look at growth, just February over February, 1 year, I'm not going to go way back, of actual payroll employment. That means the number of jobs in Rhode Island. There were more jobs a year ago than there are today. If you look at the labor force has not grown since Gina's been governor.
Say that again, because the governor says we're at record employment, blah, 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 blah.
The labor force has not grown for several years. I think there were about 555,000 people in the labor force 4 or 5 years ago. There's about the same number now. I don't think there's much difference. And so what becomes very interesting, our unemployment rate has come down. When the governor came into office, our unemployment rate was about 6.5%. It's under 4% right now, but it didn't necessarily come down because we were creating so many jobs. The labor force was pretty staid in terms of growth. And so those have to be of concern. No growth in gross domestic product. Labor force is not growing significantly. Even if you want to look at unemployment, which is, you have to be much more sophisticated, we're still 33rd in the nation in terms of our unemployment percentage. And so the people at Bryant and the people at RIPIC who wrote this study characterized the economy as stagnant. They characterized the economy as underperforming our peers. Those are quotes that they use. Those are not my quotes. And so now the question is why and what are we doing about it? And certainly it's difficult. These are not easy challenges. So there are things that you all can't control, but the fundamental structural problems remain. We've talked about these before. No population growth.
No, literally no population growth in decades.
And if you don't have people, you can't have economic growth.
Right.
Because the rabbits and the squirrels are not great indicators of economic growth. So there's no population growth. There's the out-migration of skilled, workers. We've talked about a problem with our education system. Just hired a new education commissioner.
Right.
There was hope when you do that. So my question would be, and I don't want to answer this. So we've created a Department of Commerce, or a Commerce for Rhode Island, and they do what other state commerce departments do. I'm not going to get off on them and say they make mad decisions, but they become a giant real estate company. And the programs that they do have that deal with the structural problem, not necessarily their fault, but they're not at scale. And so there's some fancy titles, some programs that seem to have a good direction, but they're not touching enough people. They're not big enough. We're not investing in those kinds of programs. And the second issue that's kind of structural, but we've known this going back to Michael Porter's work at Harvard in the late 1980s, If you want to grow an economy and you want to create jobs, you have to create business clusters.
Right.
And you have to create entrepreneurial clusters. And you don't have really economic development.
Well, let me ask you a question. Just reading KPMG came out with their analysis of where the next tech booms are going to happen. This was globally. Boston's identified as one of the hot cities outside of Silicon Valley. You know, and this was a global look. January, Massachusetts created 11,000 jobs. We lost jobs. February numbers, the nation only created 20,000 jobs. Massachusetts was up 6,000 of those 20,000 jobs. We were down jobs. Why isn't, you know, we've talked about this sort of regional economy. Why isn't Massachusetts' explosion, growth, clusters having more of an impact on Rhode Island's economy?
Well, it's how you measure that impact. And I'm not sure it's not having an impact because I mentioned...
Because of good train tickets going up to
well,
MBTA up to Boston?
Well, think about it this way. We have about 555,000 people in our labor force. About 535,000 people in that labor force are employed, so the unemployment rate is about 20,000 people on that labor force, which is not a problem. Well, if we're not growing jobs in Rhode Island, these people are working somewhere.
Yeah.
And so...
They're on the train.
So you ask what the impact of Massachusetts is, just ask yourself a second question. What would this place look like if it wasn't close to Massachusetts? So I've never measured it. I can't talk intelligently about, you know, what the impact of Massachusetts is, but you've got to be a blind man not to see that it's had some impact. Now, you could say, why has it had more impact? And I can't answer that question because I can't measure that. But that certainly has affected us. The bigger issue, and these are hard problems, they're hard for a small state. Keep in mind, we're a state of 1 million people. We're a state of 45 miles from one end to the other. So those are built-in limitations, no matter how well the state is run. But the more important question you ought to be asking, even if we failed, why don't we have an economic development strategy and tactics to achieve that strategy? And my concern, ever since the day one of Commerce for Rhode Island, was when you looked at the myriad of tax incentive programs, you and I can argue which ones are good and which ones are bad and which ones are priorities, and that's politics, so we could pay our dime and take our choice on that. So put that argument aside, and if you give me an hour, I can have plenty of conversation why I don't think they've done a good job in selecting projects. But that's besides the point. But the bigger question is, okay, that's part of an economic development portfolio. So other states do that we're doing that. But why have we let education slip? You know, why haven't, in attracting industry and business to the state, we haven't been more cluster-oriented and more tactical in using these incentives, these preferential deals? And I know it's hard, but you have to be measured after 4 or 5 years of what the outcomes have been and what the projected outcomes to be are. And there's not an economist at a university in the state, you know, at Bryant, you mentioned an economist at URI and other places, who are not reading the same tea leaves.
Yeah, and they're, economists have predicted 9 of the last 4 recessions, but they are definitely hitting the panic button right now, close to the panic button. They are raising deep concerns about the state of Rhode Island's economy, that it's already tipping, and that there's some, you talk about planning and clusters. Is it too late? I mean, shouldn't this pivot, we wish it had taken place 4, 6, or 8 years ago, depending on who the governor was or is. Should that pivot now be taking place, that we're really identifying what our strengths and weaknesses are, and we're identifying what's leverageable, and we're investing in those sectors? Because I will agree with you, if you look at that laundry list of 30-something companies that Commerce RI has invested in over the last 5 years, there's a lot of hotels, there's a lot of development. And after that, I'm not sure there's any discernible predictability as to what has been invested in.
Well, there are other projects too. That's just the Rebuild Rhode Island program. And there are other things. There's a jobs credit, and there are other tools that they have. And the question is, you know, have we been using them in the right places? Have we been meeting our targets? What have been our targets? Before we started using the Rebuild Rhode Island money, was our target to spend money or was our target to rebuild certain kinds of infrastructure and certain kinds of businesses?
Sure.
I don't know the answer to that question. I haven't seen an economic strategy plan put out to say that, okay, we're going to give tax incentives, preferential tax deals for real estate development, and we're going to use 50% for this, or manufacturing will say, well, 20% for manufacturing. Numbers are not important. And at the end of 4 years, I could sit back and say, okay, we may not have had the results we wanted, but our goal was to spend 20% of our money for manufacturing.
Right.
We spent 20% for manufacturing. Maybe we have to spend 40% next year. And so what a layman like me sees looking in from the outside is basically deals, transactions. And like in any transaction, there are good transactions, there are bad, there's some successful, some unsuccessful, but there's no, the dots are not being connected. And so you ask the question, I think it's time after 4 years to sit back and say, what have we done well in economic development? What can we do better? Where should we be investing our monies? What's the tactic and strategy for the use of those investments? And I don't hear that conversation going on. I hear a lot of defensiveness going on. I hear people spinning numbers, and I could spin these numbers differently, and somebody sitting on my left could even spin them a third kind of way. But that's not going to get, leadership is concerned about the spin, and there ought not be any political concern because the election's over.
Right.
I mean, this is not a question of anybody's political future. The election's over. Now we have the real opportunity to govern, and economic development is critical. We've recognized our problems. I think we did a good job in recruiting a new commissioner of education. Seems to have the right attitude and right skills to deal with the kinds of problems that we face here in Rhode Island. Let's see how that works out. Let's give that person their win so they can go ahead and sail.
Let's go up to the General Assembly for a second. I think both when I have conversations with influential legislators or staff up there, I think Kate Nagel, news editor, would say the same thing. There is a lot of frustration about the state of the state's budget, and that the budget is in a very difficult situation, that the governor's proposal had a lot more holes than they anticipated. I think they expect revenue to be flat or may have some more complications. Sports betting looks to be an absolute catastrophic loser, no two ways about it. It's supposed to be $23.5 million of new money. I think we're now 6 months, 7 months, 8 months into the fiscal year. It was 3 months late. Just count the last 3 months in which revenue has been reported. And I think we're flat or underwater on the net of what that has generated. Marijuana, I think there's a lot of questions about. It's supposed to generate $6 million in new revenue. I think there's a question there as to what it will generate and what it will cost to regulate it. We've talked about it before. Could there be a new strategy on how to develop some budget analysis and actions that breaks the cycle of week to week, month to month budget management?
Yeah, it's called leadership. It's called making tough decisions. So think about a budget two ways. One part of a budget is how you spend money.
Yep.
And that's not political. That shouldn't be political. I mean, maybe small p political because somebody gets their ox scored here or there.
Right, right.
A certain guy didn't get a contract or gets a contract, but it's not political in the policy sense. And there are questions that the legislature is raising of how we're spending our money. Mm-hmm. Are we spending our money efficiently? Why did the governor submit a budget and have a phantom $10 million efficiency savings? Efficiency ought to be one of the foundations that the budget is built on, and looking at the out-year forecasts and looking at the uncertainties that we face, they have really dropped the ball on how money is being spent. Second issue is where the money and what the money is spent on. Now those are political decisions. Mm-hmm. Those are choices. There's no absolutes. You and I may agree or disagree. I may agree that we didn't need to expand Medicaid. We should put more money in education, and somebody could have a counter view, which is just as reasonable. So there's two things that we're not doing. We're not having a conversation on how we're doing, and so all the questions the legislature is raising about holes in the budget, you reflect that, not so much policy, because the legislature's hands are not clean on the policy choices, because they've approved every one of those policies that the governor
absolutely.
has gone forward with. And then the second question is, if this is where it gets political and philosophical. I'm a fiscal conservative. I would not spend money on new programs until I adequately funded my existing responsibilities. And that's not the attitude up there right now. The attitude up there is, no, we're going to spend money on good programs, pre-K, Promise, expanding this social program or that social program. And if we can't fund it, then we're going to go back to the old paradigm of increasing taxes and spending. Well, this is where it really breaks down. If you have a deficit and you increase revenue, and the revenue is used to bring down the deficit, that's one reason of increasing revenue. If you have a deficit and you increase taxes to pay for new programs, you never
you never catch up.
Never catch up. And so that's where we're at.
When Sunland was governor, he left it to the departments. He said, give me a budget. You can identify your priorities with a 5% cut, a 10% cut, and a 15% cut. Left it to the department directors to make those decisions. And then in the budget process, before he turned it over to the legislature, they made decisions. DEM might get cut 15%, and economic development might only get cut 5%.
I was there. We had a DEM director who was a great director, but she lost her job because she didn't like the way we do with the budget.
That's right.
She didn't want to make those cuts. I put Sunland's first budget together. And then this is the lack of let me give you an example. And I hate people like myself say this is how we used to do it.
Right.
Governor Sunland came in November. We were facing a big deficiency. We passed a supplemental budget the day before the legislature adjourned for Washington's birthday, for that resource, because there was a sense of urgency. There was teamwork. The governor insisted.
Well, it was also catastrophic. You had a banking crisis. You had a budget deficit of $300 or $400 million.
Well, I don't think it was that high, but it was pretty high.
Well, I think it was $300 or $400 million.
We increased some taxes too, but the point that makes the story more valid. Because,
right, absolutely.
Because if the deficit is only $100 million and not $300 million, this should be a piece of cake.
Right.
But the other thing too is, the other thing is we've cut things so close. So we don't look at how we're doing. Politically, everything is good. So we make yes for every choices, and then try to raise money on top of a deficit. And we cut things so close that when there's a slightest downtick, we have a crisis. So let me give you an example. The latest report from the Department of Revenue, the Office of Revenue Analysis, projects that based on the revised revenue figures that came out in November for the current fiscal year, we're running $33 million behind. We're running $46 million behind in terms of tax revenue. Well, on a $9 billion budget or on a $4 billion general fund budget, that's 2.3% on tax revenue, about 1.4% on revenue. That's not, anything under 2% is not terrible revenue estimating.
Right.
But because we have no room for contingencies, when our revenues start to fall behind by 1% or 1.5%, we're thrown into crisis. And we have to make these tough choices that no one wants to make, and they should have made originally. So I get back to the question of budgeting. I don't think there's anything better or worse than the professionals that do budgeting here. I think they're as good as anyone I've seen. I don't think there's anything wrong with the systems. You can talk about structural change and talk about biennial budgeting, and there are things that we could probably do better. You could talk about, more as program-type budget. But by and large, our budget is a normal garden variety public budget. People that put the budget together are capable, competent professionals. Part of the problem is driven by the economy and the structure that we work from, but also a big part of it's driven by a lack of political will to make tough choices, a lack of logic. How can you defend expanding a program for universal pre-K or for Promise college when you have half your schools and more than half in urban areas that can't teach a kid how to read by the 3rd grade? You have to set priorities, you have to stick with those priorities, and you have to hold people accountable. And we don't do that. We announce programs, we appropriate money for those programs, enough money doesn't come in, we try to increase fees and taxes, and then the legislature gets nervous. Who've been a co-conspirator in this thing, they say, oh, we can't increase beach fees, or we can't increase this fee or that fee. Well, damn it, you approve the spending, you approve the concept of those programs, and so what's your suggestion? And,
Let's jump over in the last couple of minutes. GOP, I know you were not at the GOP convention. There's actually photos that showed a whole bunch of people actually in the room. I think the Republicans were very excited that they had a whole bunch of people in a room on a Saturday morning.
I wish they had many people vote for them the last time they had election.
They've elected a new chairwoman, Sue Cienki, to lead the party and rebuild it. What's your thought of the state of the two-party system in Rhode Island?
Well, we don't have a two-party system in Rhode Island, so that's an easy question to answer.
So all 5 general officers are Democrats. All 4 members of the congressional delegation are Democrats. Obviously, both sides of the General Assembly are, and we're down to only one mayor who's a Republican. So,
and he lost in the fight for the chairmanship, so he's not a very strong Republican anymore.
It is not the strongest day of the GOP. But don't you have to crash to bottom before you can rebuild?
Well, but the question is how long you want to be on the bottom.
Right.
You know, like anything else, it's election of a new head, new leader of an organization, and so you know, one should not start out pessimistic. One should start out, you know, optimistic. I think some of the initial comments have been helpful, have been more focused than I can remember in some time. That the party is going to focus on electing members of the General Assembly. Every time they get into endorsing candidates for statewide office, they make half the party mad, and it screws up. So that, you know, they have that. The new leader, there's a sense of focus. You know, anytime there's a new leader, there's new energy. You have to capitalize on that energy. That energy dissipates very quickly. It's not going to last a long time. So, you know, I have a wait-and-see attitude. I think the one thing that's the elephant in the room, if I can use that expression.
Of course, for the Republicans,
Yeah.
Of course you could.
Well, it's Trump.
Yeah.
And the thing I get concerned about is I see too much in the party of loyalty to Trump and not loyalty to sound Republican principles of governing. And I don't know how they're going to, that's their challenge. I don't know how they're going to deal with that challenge. But, you know, at this point, there's no reason to be negative. It's to be hopeful and hope that energy is translated into accomplishment.
The money man, Gary Sass, thank you as always. A pleasure you being here. Hopefully folks within the governor's office were listening and will take heed. We're going to be right back in about 30 seconds with one of the partners from one of the fastest growing CPA firms, I think, in the free world. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. Josh Fenton here with Art Lambie. Art is a partner at literally the fourth fastest growing accounting firm in the United States, DeSanto Priest and Company, right? We don't want to forget and Company.
There's a lot of company.
I guess you fall into the and Company.
I do.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
You know, we love entrepreneurs on Monday here on Business Monday, and we love having the conversation. Talk a little bit about the growth.
Well, the firm was started a little over 50 years ago, and through a series of strategic alliances and partnerships and mergers, all based here in Rhode Island, the firm has managed to grow to close to 90 employees, 50 CPAs.
That's great.
And has now been recognized as one of the top 250 firms by size in the country, and the fourth fastest growing CPA firm in the nation.
Yeah, that's great. What's the secret to the growth, right? We're in a state of 1 million people. 50 years ago, we were 1 million people. You know, Gary's just talking about the economy shows some signs of slowing in his analysis. Len Ladaro down at URI had the same. But that's not slowing you guys. You guys are making acquisitions, building out the staff, hiring. What's been the key to the success?
Our people are the key. There's absolutely no question about it. We continue to reinvest in our people through technology and training, deliver that superior client service to Rhode Island's family-owned businesses. Obviously, we stretch out throughout the entire country. We have a big book of business, a lot of clients in the southeastern Massachusetts, New Bedford, Fall River area. But it's really our people that make us what we are today, and that focus on Rhode Island's family-owned businesses.
And, you know, Rhode Island lives and dies with small business. We seem to invest in big businesses sometimes. You know, Stephen Pryor's been here a number of times. We have this arm wrestling match. I guess you want to bring some blue chip companies in here as well. But this is a state in which there's 40,000 small businesses, 30,000 of them are really active. It's a huge part of our economy. How do you serve small businesses but not have the big cost structure of having 90 employees and 50 CPAs and a fancy office space and all those things that come with the overhead?
Yeah, so we do have the 90 people.
Right.
We have an enormous amount of resources, which helps those growing Rhode Island-based businesses to grow right here in Rhode Island. For instance, we have folks that can help clients with sales tax compliance in multi-states as they expand outside of Rhode Island and do business in different states. We have a couple of folks that partner with us relative to international taxation. So even though we're a local-based CPA firm and have built and grown organically in Rhode Island, we understand that our target market, where we service, where our bread is buttered, so to speak, is in the Rhode Island-based market. A lot of other firms this day and age have been merging into bigger firms that are outside of the state of Rhode Island, and we've done all this growth organically inside Rhode Island based upon the quality of the people that we have, their training, and the technology we utilize.
Well, and you've got good feeder systems, right? URI and Bryan are both schools that are generating a lot of smart young men and women that you can tap into.
We're very fortunate. There's a lot of great resources here. Johnson and Wales, Rhode Island College, just to name a few others that weren't on your list.
Young Mr. Almonte was on one of our end of the year lists last year. I think he was one of the 19 to watch in 19. That guy's got to be the most popular guy in Rhode Island. About 8,000 people shared his designation as one of the 19 to watch.
He is, and you know, we have a few. We have some really outstanding young talent. And when I say young, we can pick an age. I don't know, 40 or less, 30, even 30 or less.
Well, he's a young guy. I think I coached him in lacrosse once upon a time.
He is, but we've got a few of those.
Yeah, that's great.
We're really excited about it.
Let's go national for a second. Sure. Obviously, we had major tax reform a little over a year ago. It was the biggest tax reform since 1986. I was a young staffer to John Chafee, who was on the finance committee and was a conferee on that tax changes. Big changes, a lot of confusion, a lot of people not understanding. Rhode Island as a state seems to still be trying to figure out what all the implications are. I've had a number of conversations with Paul Dion over at Revenue, and he's always trying to figure out what all the impacts are. Where are we and where are businesses in understanding the implications of this round of tax reform?
It's a really good question, and I'll answer it this way. The IRS, as recently as just a few weeks ago, is still issuing guidance on some of these rules.
Gotta love it, right?
Primarily for our business clients. So disproportionately this year, we're going to find that a lot of our family-owned business clients are going to be placed on extension and finished up sometime over the spring or summer until we all get a little bit more guidance and understanding of what those new rules really entail. But there, as you mentioned, overwhelming amount of new rules that impact taxpayers in a variety of different ways.
One of the issues that we track, a couple of business issues that we track constantly, is one is the decline of retail. The other is the implications of artificial intelligence. And Darrell West, who's down at Brookings, used to be at Brown University, is one of the leading thinkers on AI. Wrote a book a couple of years ago. McKinsey had a report recently that said 800,000 people are going to be impacted. And one of the sectors, one of the white-collar sectors that's going to be impacted is accounting. Talk a little bit about, you've got 90 people. You've got to be competitive against, Ernst & Young over here and other folks over there. How are you thinking about this transformation of application of technology into your workplace and what the opportunities are and what the complexities are?
Sure. So a couple of facets. And our firm has a couple different departments: taxation, auditing, AI, and auditing information. That is going to impact that group in that department. So training is a real important part of our process. And in this day and age, things are changing so quickly that with the staff that we've got, the professionals that we already have, it's about training them to audit AI and the data that comes to us in the different forms in the future. The other piece of that is impacting significantly the group which I'm the director of, and that's the Small Business Advisory Group at DeSanto Priest. So even though we're a 90-person firm, we have a whole group of folks that I chair up that are dedicated to providing QuickBooks services and tax prep and planning to Rhode Island's family-owned businesses from startup to sale. And in our group, what we're finding is, and a lot of folks found this a few years back when there used to be a room full of bookkeepers, right? Handwriting all the ledgers out, and then in came Excel, and then in came QuickBooks. And everybody said, well, we're not going to need those bookkeepers, and we're not going to need you accountants anymore. But the reality is our function does change, and we see our function changing, particularly as advisors going forward.
You guys are always good at the accounting industrial complex, right? If you can apply Eisenhower's term about the military industrial complex,
right.
You always find a new job for yourselves.
We do, but the government makes it easy for us.
That's right,
Josh.
If I'm a mom and pop small business, I've got 15 employees, and I'm sitting there, and right now I've been using Cousin Joe down the street, and boy, this thing's getting complicated, and Cousin Joe's scratching his head more and more. But I only pay Cousin Joe X. Am I going to have to switch over to you guys and pay 5X or 10X?
Yeah, and we find that that's where we get a lot of our new relationships. Are those Rhode Island grown and growing businesses who either through their banker or other financial advisor or business associate, they realize they're just growing too fast, and
right.
they need some additional help. And that's a perfect fit. I mean, that's when DeSanto Priest can really fill the void. Now, yes, there's going to be a difference in price for a variety of different reasons, but as accountants, we're entrepreneurs by nature. We understand it. If you spend X, you expect to get 2 or 3 times that in
right.
value in return. So as we deliver services, particularly in our small business group at DeSanto Priest, we recognize that every dollar is important to a Rhode Island family-owned business owner. So we want to make sure when they pay our bill, when they look at that invoice at the end of the year, they understand the value that they receive.
In your small business group, talk about the smallest companies and the largest companies that fall into that group.
So you would have your typical startup.
Do you have any babysitters on the small side?
Well,
part-time high school babysitters.
Well,
a little bigger than that, right?
A little bigger,
Okay.
certainly a little bit bigger than that. Distribution companies. One gentleman with a truck is formed an S corp or an LLC. We can help get the tax identification number, help them with the articles of organization, state registration, sales permits, all those things, payroll. Linking a bank account into QuickBooks, setting up the QuickBooks files, tax planning, planning your quarterly tax payments, all those things that go along with owning a business.
So maybe one person, small business on the small side.
Yeah.
And on the large side, how big is your biggest small business?
We have some wonderful, wonderful clients, and most clients we have that confidentiality.
Yeah,
with
yeah.
them,
I'm
but
not looking you to name
but
names.
one of them, there's a couple of them that you'll find on our website that
Yeah.
do some great testimonials, and one of them are the Carty brothers and Carty's Furniture.
What exactly do they do? I've not heard of them.
But a great family, a great example of how to folks who are dedicated to a family business, the community. We're a part. So honored to be a
by
part.
the way, not an easy space. You've got national players coming
Sure.
in here. You've got Berkshire Hathaway owning Jordan's. You've got Amazon looking to eat their lunch and everybody else's lunch. This is not for the faint of heart, running a furniture company in 2019.
No, never mind the competition, but labor shortages, advertising dollars, increased demands on insurance coverages and infrastructure costs, all those, and income taxes.
Right.
We can't forget about that.
Listen, I want to thank you so much. Congratulations on all the success, all the growth. Let us know when you hit 100, 150, when you're number one fastest growing. And it's great to see a Rhode Island-based company. We have this conversation a lot from an editorial standpoint and not the news side. Very worried about some of these consolidations, healthcare companies being gobbled up by Boston firms. You know, I think it's pretty easy. That used to be the gas company. It's now a event space and a bar. That building over there used to be Fleet Bank, the largest employer, and it's now empty for going on 6 years, I think, next week. So it's great to see a Rhode Island-based company being the fueler of the growth, not the innocent victim being acquired with the capital and the decision making moving somewhere else. So congratulations.
Thank you,
Really
Josh.
appreciate it. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. The first hour was great with aquaculture and solar and wind energy being explained and seeing what the business opportunities. Obviously, Cha-ching, the money man, Gary Sass, always a wealth of information, and Art here from DeSanto and Priest, the fourth fastest growing accounting firm in the United States. Congratulations on all the success. We'll be back tomorrow. Kate Nagel, news editor, has a jam-packed afternoon. I think she's got the mayor of East Providence coming in and a few others. So we'll see you back tomorrow on GoLocal Live. Thanks for tuning in.